your farewells.
Avery, congrats on the soccer season. My daughter got to play with the JVs a little bit. And
yeah, I got
to had a great year.
Yeah, it was a really great year despite everything that has happened.
All right, okay. We are live.
Hold on, we are live. Okay, great. Welcome everybody to the Tuesday, December 1st Policy Committee meeting. I want to welcome everybody today. We have an abundance of support here. We have our teacher representative and not one, but two students joining in, and our fellow committee members and several other administrators who are joining in to help support some of our policy work today. So welcome to everyone. I hope everybody had a safe and healthy and happy Thanksgiving. And at this moment, I'd like to turn it over to George Riegel, who will kick off the meeting for us.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. Yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed their Thanksgiving break last week, and thank you for joining the policy committee tonight. We do want to say thank you, and we have our two student representatives here, Avery and Austin. Avery will be officially transitioning out of being the student liaison, and Austin will be taking over. Austin was with us last month, so welcome back, Austin. But Avery, we do want to thank you for all your work on the policy committee. It's always appreciated. Tonight's agenda is very similar to last month's agenda, so hopefully we'll be able to get through all the policies tonight. We do have policy 248 up for a second read, which again is related to Title IX. Policies 815 and 829. Scott Hand is back with us. Thank you, Scott. Both technology policies, which were reviewed last month and for a second read tonight. Policy 348, which we did not get to last month, is up for a first read, and then subsequent policies 448 and 548, which we'll go over, are up for a first read repeal. And we'll go over why that is when we get to that section. Back to you, Amy.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Avery, are you going to stick with us for the meeting, or you on and popping off?
On and popping off. It's Austin tonight.
Okay, well, thank you for being such a great mentor to Austin. We're so excited to have him joining our committee for the next year's worth of policy work. And thank you, Avery, on behalf of the whole committee, for your contributions as a student. The student voice is important in all the work we do as a school board, because we're doing it for our students. So I want to thank you. If there's anything you want to say and just your parting words from the committee, now's your opportunity before we move into the agenda. But thank you again so much for always coming so prepared and contributing such thoughtful remarks on behalf of students.
Thank you, Amy. It's been a really amazing experience being here, and I'm thankful for having such an amazing opportunity, and being here every time and being able to contribute to my community has been something that a lot of students aren't fortunate enough to have, and I'm grateful to be in this position. And being here every month has been just such an honor, and I'm excited for Austin to have the same experience that I had, and how you guys are so welcoming to him. It's just truly amazing, and I'm excited for the future of policy committee and for this position as well. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Avery, and congrats. As I heard Jeff reference, you've got some good soccer stuff going for you there. So good luck with all of that and the rest of the school year. Stay in touch and don't stray too far from our policy work. You can keep us in line if we need it. We'll be counting on you for that. So thank you very much. With that,
thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to turn it over for some public comment. Allison, are you handling that for us tonight?
I am, but we have not had any public comment come in yet this evening.
Okay, super. Thanks, Allison. Then we'll move to the approval of minutes. We have two different sets of minutes on the agenda for approval tonight. The first one is the October 13th Policy Committee meeting minutes. And I think there's somebody who wants to say something about those.
Yeah, Mrs. Goldman, I'd like to pull these again. My apologies to you, Mr. Riegel. I don't think I got my email to you in time. So I'm going to pull these. We'll get it squared away, and we'll have these on the December agenda.
Okay, great. Thank you. Did anybody else have any concerns about the October minutes that might want to coordinate with Susan and Mr. Riegel about them? Okay. How about for the next item on the agenda, the November Policy Committee meeting minutes? Does anybody have any concerns about those in their present form? I don't see anybody jumping up and down. So let's say we will approve the November Policy Committee meeting minutes, and the October ones will we'll come back again in December. With that, let's move into the regular part of our agenda, which is we have several policies up, as Mr. Regal referenced in his administrative remarks. And the first one is policy 248, currently titled Unlawful Harassment.
Yep, I'll make this short. The new proposed title change, as we discussed a couple months now, will be policy 248, just harassment. So unlawful will be taken out. And this is back for a second read this month. We had a conversation a few months ago now regarding some wording to make sure that we're in line with Title IX changes and to make sure that the policy aligned with what the committee had a discussion about, which was some wording related to who was protected and what procedure we'd be following when things happen related to harassment. So policy 248 is up for a second read. And Ed, if you want to add anything, go ahead.
Nothing to add from me.
Okay. Okay, great. So let's check in with the committee. I'll start with our student, Austin. Do you have second go around with this policy? Anything to add from that you didn't get to say for the first reading or thoughts since?
No, I said everything I wanted to say last time. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Austin. Mrs. McMenamin?
I'm good with it. Thank you.
Okay. Liz?
I'm good as well.
Jeff?
I had a very quick clarification question, Ed. I've seen in this policy and some others, the word agent. I just wanted to know what that meant. I'm sorry for not asking this last month because it was in the policy or in the AR, but when we refer to the term agent, can you just explain for me and maybe others what that means in layman's terms?
Sure. Where are you seeing that? Is that in the
So I just see
definition?
it, this particular, I circled it on the AR, and I know I don't want to change it.
Sure.
I'm just simply asking for, in the second paragraph in reporting procedures, parents, guardians, teachers, administrators, etc., agents and contractors shall be alert to incidents of harassment.
I mean, essentially, that would be a designee. So if someone is doing something for another person or an individual delegates a responsibility to another individual and that individual is performing the obligation on behalf of the delegating individual, you're an agent for that original individual. So that's what that is meant to be.
Could you just give a quick example? It'd be someone perhaps with special needs who has somebody who speaks on their behalf or signs
Sure.
papers.
That could be an example. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
That's all. I was just looking for clarification. No issues otherwise or questions.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Susan?
I'm good.
Okay. And that leaves me, I guess, unless anybody else on the call wants to chime in. And I did have some questions about 248 last time, and being sensitive to the time constraints, it was recommended that I bring them up today. Hopefully there's nothing substantive, but there are a couple things in terms of wording that I wanted to ask tonight. One is when the definition of sexual harassment on the first page of 248, this is a student-centered policy. And I just want to clarify that the definition of sexual harassment does not make repeated references to a student because this is a definition that's pulled directly from, it's sort of an overarching sexual harassment definition, and it's not specific to students. Is that correct?
That's correct. The definition comes, yes, from the Title IX regulations. That's exactly correct.
Okay. Well, as a second, if we move to the second page where we talk about delegation of responsibility, the second sentence under delegation of responsibility says each staff member shall be responsible for promoting an educational environment, blah, blah, blah. Is there a difference between a staff member and a district employee? Because in the definition on the previous page of sexual harassment, we talk about employees of the district. So my question is, are we inadvertently eliminating anybody by using the term staff member as opposed to district employee?
No, I think those two terms are meant to be interchangeable, but if there's a preference, we can certainly make that change, and that would, of course, be a non-substantive change. So we could do that if there was a desire to do that. I think more common more commonly, I would see policies written with the terms district employee more frequently than you would see staff member. So if you were going to go in one direction, I would recommend saying district employees.
Okay, so would anybody on the committee object to taking Ed's recommendation to maybe swap out those words?
Well, I have a question about that, Amy. I didn't know that this was going to be your question. Is this, is it the responsibility of every employee to promote an educational environment? That's a question, Ed. Or is, when it comes to the actual educational environment, is that just limited to, you know, first of all, Amy, I wanted to see where you saw the distinction between staff and employees, but staff, I infer staff to mean teaching staff, you know, or paraprofessionals. So it's more a question of, is the intention of the law that every employee is responsible for promoting that educational environment, as opposed to up above where every employee, you know, is, you know, you're prohibited from doing this. Do you hear the nuance of the question?
I do, and I think from a high level standpoint, every employee of the district, you know, within their designated job responsibilities, you know, is and should be expected to promote an environment that's free from harassment. Now, different employees, a classroom teacher's role in doing that may be very different than a school nurse's role in doing that, versus a custodian's role in doing that, versus a food service worker's role in doing that. But I think the intention here is simply to say that everyone should be, you know, everyone in connection with their, you know, role in the district should be promoting, you know, an environment that's free from harassment.
Okay.
All right, so that said, is there any objection to changing that language to be consistent with the wording on the previous page of district employee, and also because it's Ed's recommendation that we change from staff member to district employee? Okay, looking like nobody has an objection to it. But
Amy, I'm sorry, I don't see on the first page where you see district employee. That's what I was asking you.
yeah, I said under sexual harassment, if you look and you'll see in the first number one, it says an employee of the district.
Got it. Okay. Yep.
Okay.
So I'm making the change so it now says all district employees are responsible for.
Or shall be responsible. You're going to leave the word shall?
All district employees shall be responsible for.
Okay. The other, thank you, Ed. The other question I had about this, again, and I apologize, I had these questions last month and in consultation with Mr. Regal and Mr. Diazio, they suggested I bring them up this time at this meeting. This policy we've talked about is really specific to students who are being, this is a students who are being harassed. And we had a sentence in the old version of it where it explicitly said that under the purpose. Since it's not there anymore, there are a couple instances where I'm just concerned that the average person reading it, even though it's a 200 level policy for students, it's not as clear as it otherwise could be. So for example, under guidelines, it says the board encourages students who believe they or others have been, the word who actually is missing, but I'm wondering if others means also other students as opposed to others in the district.
I think the intention there would be other students.
So if that's the intention, is there a problem with saying the board encourages students who believe they or other students who have been subjected to harassment, including, just to reinforce this is about students? Because we go off in a couple different directions here, and I'm wondering if that clarity could be helpful.
I can make the change if there's no objection.
Does anybody
I have
object
no
to that?
concerns with that.
Okay, because I'm going to run it by you, Ed, just to get your legal perspective and then
Sure.
see if the committee agrees, if you agree with me. How about we work it like that? Because I have a
That's
couple
fine.
of questions like that. Then in the third paragraph under guidelines, the first sentence says the district will promptly investigate all complaints or other reports of harassment. What is the difference between, because there's an or there, a complaint and an other report of harassment, or are they one and the same?
Well, there's a process under the Title IX regulations, which is and where you can file a formal complaint. That formal complaint procedure is outlined on the website. If you click on the hyperlink that's embedded in the guideline section of the policy, part of that complaint procedure is how to file a formal complaint. That said, there are times that someone may not be coming forward with the intention of filing a formal complaint. They may just report certain conduct. They might report to a teacher that something happened, not even intending that they're filing a formal complaint of harassment. So the intention of this language was to say, regardless of whether the district becomes aware of possible conduct that's in violation of this policy, regardless of whether it comes through a formal complaint or through some other report, it should get treated the same way.
Okay, so because there was a question about that, does it make sense to say the district will promptly investigate all formal complaints or reports of harassment, to be clearer?
That would be fine.
Does anybody have, because that was really helpful to illuminate what that sentence meant for me. Does anybody have any objection to that clarity, that clarification? Or I'm not seeing any objection. Okay. The second sentence then says claims of harassment by a student against another student will be investigated in the same manner as other student disciplinary investigations. And yet I'm not sure we cite policy 218, which is where you would go to follow that, to be in that same manner. Does
Yep.
that 218, should that be cross-referenced?
Yes, I'm adding it now. Good point. I agree.
Okay. I'm almost done. The paragraph after that says claims of harassment against a student by a non-student will be investigated in accordance with procedures outlined. And then the procedure is in bold. Why is all of that in bold, just out of curiosity?
It should not be. It must have gotten, when the clean version of the document was made, it must have popped up that way, but it shouldn't be. It should all be, and it should be corrected now. I think I changed that.
Okay, so if
Yep.
it's not in bold, to be honest with you, since the essence of this is if you're being harassed by a student, you go one way with addressing it. And if you're harassed by a non-student, you go another way. If anything, for bold, I almost am wondering if it makes sense to say against another student or by a non-student, if that should be differentiated by bold or not. That I'm not as tied to, but I just wanted to point that out as a possible, something that could possibly need additional clarification. Because this is important, student feeling harassed. It should be crystal clear in a policy how you, in my opinion, how you go about addressing that. Do you have any solicitor feedback on that? And then we'll toss it to the committee to see if there's any objection.
No, I don't think either way makes a difference.
Okay, so we could leave it the way it is, or bold student versus and non-student, so it jumps out better, or have them start as separate paragraphs for two different routes. Would anybody have an objection to that? No, I'm getting no. So is that possible, Ed, to maybe have claims of harassment by a student against another student sort of be the start of one paragraph, and then claims of harassment against a student by a non-student be another, just so it's clearer what happens if it's a fellow student versus a non-student? You're muted, Ed, I think.
Yes, and so yes, just I think I might be missing where we're at. So the district will promptly investigate all formal complaints or other reports of harassment. And then that sentence is followed by a sentence that says claims of harassment by a student against another student. And then there's a paragraph break. And then it
Right.
says claims of harassment against a student by a non-student. That's its own separate paragraph. Am I adding an additional paragraph somewhere?
No, I was just wondering if claims of, I know that there's a sentence before claims of a harassment by a student against another student. So that sentence is sort of hanging there. Maybe it could be added to the paragraph before, and then you have two paragraphs that start exactly the same. One for claims of harassment by a student against another student, and the next paragraph is claims of harassment against a student by a non-student.
Okay, so
What
the
I mean?
paragraph break should be after the sentence that says the district will promptly investigate.
Right. And if that sentence looks weird hanging out, you could probably tack it on to the one before.
Sure. Okay.
I just think it makes the guidance easier to jumps out at you more. Does anybody have any objection to that so far? Please don't be shy and interrupt if you do.
I actually got to tell you, I don't agree with that. I think leaving the paragraph that says claims of harassment against a student by a non-student should be left the way it is. It's a new topic. It's a new paragraph. Just the way it's written. Whether or not they want to leave it bold, if that was a mistake, try and fix it.
I'm saying that should be its own paragraph, Susan. I'm agreeing with you.
Well, that's how it is on my screen. So I don't know what you're seeing that's different.
No, I'm saying keep it the same as a separate paragraph. I'm saying the paragraph before would be its own paragraph too.
It is its own
It
paragraph.
is in our copy.
It is on our copy, Amy.
I'm sorry, maybe my copy is. No, the third paragraph starts with a sentence that says the district will promptly investigate.
Yeah.
So I was just proposing that go to the paragraph before and start the next paragraph starts with claims of harassment, and the third paragraph.
That's how mine reads. It's two different.
You want to combine the second and the third paragraph, Amy?
No.
Oh, then we already have it separate on our form.
Yeah, they're already separate.
There is a sentence before, and if you
I
look
think
at.
I think I might have figured it out. I think the spacing is just off. I think I fixed it to reflect what
Maybe you guys
everyone
are
is
looking
saying.
at it online, and
Yes.
since I'm looking at it on paper, it looks different. Oh. No, Jeff, okay.
Yeah.
So I don't
All
know
right, well,
why. Yeah.
Jeff,
I'm just mindful of the time, and we're going
Yes.
to the first.
I
We're not
know.
even on the first policy.
Yes, I know. We'll move along, but I was asked to bring this forward at this meeting as opposed to otherwise. So I just have one other thing to put on there, and this is that the complaints, just the third from last paragraph under guidelines, Ed, where it says complaints or other reports of harassment, that should be consistent with how you changed the one previously.
Formal.
Well, I don't understand what you're saying, Amy. So hold on. You're telling him to make changes in a policy, and I'm not sure what you mean by that change.
The third from last paragraph, do you see where it says complaints or other reports of harassment?
Yeah.
So when that was in a previous sentence under guidelines, and Ed changed it, it's the third paragraph under guidelines. He changed the wording to say, "Will investigate all formal complaints or reports of harassment." It's that same sentence is repeated again in the third from last paragraph.
Yeah.
So you think it should say, instead of saying complaints or other reports, you want it to say formal complaints or other reports of harassment?
However you changed it previously, just for consistency, if that makes sense to you as the solicitor behind this, that's what I wanted to ask.
Sure. Yeah, I think that would be a fine change.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for entertaining these questions. I'm sorry, I've had them since the last meeting and was told to bring them to this one. So I appreciate your indulgence in my being able to ask those. If anybody doesn't have any objection, we'll move this forward to the board for a second reading in December. Is everybody good with that? Yep. Okay. Moving on to the next item, 4.2. George?
Sure. So policy 815, which is currently titled Acceptable Use of Internet and Network Resources. Just a reminder, it'll be titled Acceptable Use of Technology. And Scott is with us if there's any final questions, but he was with us last month. And I think we had some good feedback and a couple minor changes, but nothing else at this point. Ed?
Correct. No changes to this one.
Okay. Does anybody, Austin, any changes to 815 from the last time go round?
No changes.
Mrs. McMenamin?
None here.
Liz?
None.
Jeff?
I was wondering where behaviors, I guess, and what I mean by that is sort of fit in here. So unacceptable behavior. So I'm thinking of school being in virtual mode and things like that I've learned about Zoom bombing, for example, which is that a funny or is that an example of someone breaking the policy? If they're disrupting someone's education, perhaps doing worse. So I guess that's an example, but my broader question is, are behaviors encompassed in this policy as well? Behaviors one can do with their technology. So I think of social media and I think of, all the things in this policy. I don't know, maybe I'm not I hope I'm making sense, Ed.
You are, and I think if you look at in the AR to 815, you'll see a list. There's a list of 28.
Yeah.
It would fall, like that type of behavior would fall within one or more of those 28 categories.
I believe even 28.
Yeah, and it's growing, isn't it, Scott? You know, it's every day you learn something new.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Never get phone calls. It's not good when it's on your landline. Sorry.
Okay. So Jeff, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers my question there. I had a couple other quick questions. Can I ask them now? It may not relate to the wording of the policy. I was thinking of, does this also cover events on school property that aren't sponsored by the district? So for example, I don't know, how does a booster club, maybe that falls under the district because it's sanctioned? Is that covered here as well? So if we're renting out to non-school groups and they do something with, like a booster club for a sport or something, would they be covered under this as well?
They would be, and the reason would be is in connection with the use of facilities application.
Okay.
They would have to agree to abide by all policies, which would include use of the district's network. So yes, if someone was using our facilities and inappropriately using district technology resources, we would be able to control that.
Okay. I may come back, Mrs. Goldman, but I'm going to hold for now.
You want to come back to this one?
I may.
Okay.
I'm going to pause for now if that's okay.
Okay. Susan?
Just to follow up to Jeff's point and let Ed clarify this. So the adherence has less to do with being a group associated with our district and more they would be anybody coming onto our property, if they're renting the facility, would be captured through the rental agreement, the facilities rental, right?
Correct.
Right. And that's where they get told they have no expectation of privacy if they're using our district resources, the website, the server, or what have you. Somewhere in there.
And I should clarify, the 815, the policy 815 does apply globally to all users of the network. But the way that we would enforce that is through saying, in connection with your use of facilities application, you broke this board policy, which is applicable to you. And therefore, we're going to impose limits in the future, or you're going to have to pay for the corrective action, whatever the case may be.
Right, that's my point. We capture them through the facilities agreement.
Correct.
That's all. That's Amy. That's all I have.
Okay, Jeff, you wanted another shot at this?
Just thank you for indulging me. And I'm back to these responsible use standards and prohibited activities. Yeah, just one quick question. I know we talked about this last month too, and I think it's covered. So, please don't feel the need to repeat. I don't want to be mindful of our time. I'm very cognizant, just as a parent, seeing things on social media, like say Instagram, people using our logos. I know we talked about this last month for their own purposes, private purposes, and I'm wondering if 27, which is number 27 on this list, covers that unauthorized establishment of websites linked to district websites for themselves purporting to be district affiliated websites and social media groups. If that was the intent of this particular, I think that's just and Scott, you may have a point on this, such a growing issue that we have to be really on top of our use of our logos to, and I don't know what, cute boys of Radnor, cute girls of Radnor. And you see that every day. I mean, and they use our logos. That to me clearly falls under this, correct?
We would be able to, if somebody was using our logo inappropriately, or to imply any type of affiliation or endorsement that we didn't like, we would be able to go after that conduct. They wouldn't necessarily be violating this policy, because presumably they wouldn't be using any of our technology resources, but we do have the ability. And I think about a year or two back, when we revised the communications policy in the 900 series, there was a section in that policy that dealt exclusively with use of logos and mascots, and the forms that you have to fill out, the permissions that you need, and the consequences for using things that you're not allowed to. So I think that specific scenario is probably covered in a different policy.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yep.
This is specific to the technology.
Yeah, It's in 815.1, which is use of social media, which directly describes logos, employees and the students not permitted to use logo or mark in any form of social media or websites not related to RTSD.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, and that's a good point, Jeff, because I was thinking 903, I believe, is our brand new communications policy.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure that there's something in there that prohibits the use of any district logos without the express permission of the district. It's not cross-referenced here in 815, but I don't know if it should be or not, to Jeff's point, to lock it up.
I think it's a separate, I do believe it's a separate topic, even though I see how it could be interpreted to be related, but I do think it's separate, because I don't think in that scenario there's really necessarily any connection to the district's technology. We certainly could do a cross-reference. There's no harm in doing that, but I think it might be a little bit of a attenuated reference.
Okay. All right. So Jeff, you've learned a lot about where logos are covered in the policy manual, and do a little reading in your spare time to learn more about that. Anybody else have any other questions, or can we move this along to its second reading in December? All good? All right. Thank you, everybody, for that. Let's move on to the next item, which is policy 829, personal electronic communication devices. Mr. Regal?
Yep. So again, I'll keep it short. Back for a second read, excuse me. The title change, or the current title, is personal electronic communication devices, and it is proposed that the new title be policy 829, personal electronic devices. And if there's any other questions, again, Scott's here, and Ed, if you want to add anything now.
Nothing
Okay.
from me.
Okay. Austin?
Yes, I have a question. Are students who automatically connect to any school's Wi-Fi because they already have the password, like Radnor High School, are they granted privacy during extracurricular events like recreational basketball games, lacrosse games? Because I know that if I were to go play a lacrosse game and I just connected to through my phone, do I have privacy, or because I am on school grounds, I don't have that privacy? That's
Since you'd be accessing the district's network, if there was an allegation that you were, I mean, the district wouldn't routinely scan for any type of misconduct or anything in that setting. But if there was an allegation that there was misconduct taking place at a lacrosse game, for example, and there were inappropriate communications that were being exchanged between two players on the team on their personal devices, but they were connected to Radnor's network while doing so, presumably the district could go back and review the network files to see what information was transmitted over the network. So that's why there would be that's why there's the statement saying that there's not necessarily privacy. It doesn't mean that somebody is sitting watching all the network activity in those settings.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Austin. Mrs. McMenamin?
I'm good.
Liz?
Austin had my exact question, so thank you. That's the only one I had.
Okay, 2 for 1 there. And Jeff?
I had one question. Mr. Diazio, I think I probably know the answer, but I think it's worth pointing out. We don't, when I say we, the district, I'm thinking of virtual learning environment again.
Sure.
And thinking of kids, I'm sure that none of them do this, right, Austin? You're never on your personal cell phone while, look at them while you're taking the class online. And does the district have any, I don't know how to ask this, like, we can't regulate use while students are learning virtually, I guess is where I'm headed. In other words, example, I'm at home, I'm on my Zoom class, and I'm playing on my phone, and maybe I'm using the district's, I don't know if I'm facilitating something through the district, but I'm on my phone. Do we have any rights, because we're not on school grounds there, we're using our personal device at home? We might be doing something inappropriate. But if that's done over district technology?
If it's done over district technology, you
Then
can
that's the
regulate
line.
it. If it's
Okay.
if it's not, then you generally cannot, unless you can somehow establish the connection to the school. So, for example, if there two individuals were messaging on their private device about a drug deal that was going to happen on school property later in the day, and the district became aware of that underlying conduct that was going to take place on school property, you would be able to discipline for. You wouldn't necessarily be able to do anything about the off-campus communications because you haven't necessarily established a strong enough connection to the school.
That's what I thought. I'm not trying to trick you or come up with these riddles.
Yep.
I just think in this virtual learning environment, who knows what, that's all.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Susan?
No, I'm good. Good questions.
All right, so then we will, I think at this point, 829 is ready to go for its second reading in December. And we'll move into policy 348. George?
Yep. So policy 348, which is currently unlawful harassment, the proposed change is policy 348, just harassment. So dropping unlawful. We haven't gotten a chance to review this policy, so it is up for a first read, and this is a policy related to the Title IX regulations, changes required due to Title IX regulations. It again relates to the reporting and investigating of harassment of employees. As a reminder, and the two up for repeal tonight, policy 348, policy 448 and 548 are up for repeal because those employees covered under those current policies will be captured under a new 348 policy, a new category 300 category. So there's a note in there under the agenda item. And Ed, if you want to add anything now, it's all yours.
Nothing for me. I'll wait for the questions because I imagine there may be some.
Okay. Thank you, George and Ed. Let's go to Austin. Do you have any questions about 348?
I believe that 348 is similar to 248 from last month, correct?
Yes, except yes, 348 is more of an employee centered policy, whereas 248 was more of a student centered policy.
Yep.
Yep.
And the question I asked last month would have related to this one as well, which is just related to where can we find additional information, like who to contact. So I don't have any questions.
All right, so was that addressed though last month, Austin? Yeah, okay. Let's see, Mrs. McMenamin?
I'm okay with this.
Okay. Liz?
Okay, but I think I asked this before. I mean, we didn't get to this, but I'm just curious why the ARs are so different in 248 to 348. Were they just written at different times? You know, how we detail reporting procedures, you know, here it's all in this is much more detailed than when you go back to 248.
Yes. So regardless of whether you have for sexual harassment allegations, the investigation process is always the process that is outlined and on the district's website at the link, which is pasted in both 248 and 348. Then so that's all sexual harassment. Then as 248 states, student on student contact gets investigated just like any other student discipline matter. So then what we're left with is harassment of a student by a non-student, so staff on student harassment, and then harassment of employees. That's the other kind of bucket that we haven't addressed. So in this AR 348, there's a 4-step investigation procedure, which is outlined for that second bucket of harassment of employees. You'll recall that so as I see it, the one gap that still exists is we don't have necessarily an investigation procedure for harassment of students by non-students. And what we said in policy 248 was that for harassment of a student by a non-student, you would follow the investigation procedure in AR 348, which is this step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 process. So instead of just pasting it into that AR in 248, we simply directed folks to the procedure in 348. Does that help at all?
Yes, a little.
I know that's a really long way of saying that, and I can try to put it in writing if that would be easier.
No. So where does that? I'm just trying to find that where it said follow 3. You reference it in the AR of 248. I don't see
Yes.
that.
So if we go to the AR in 248, actually it's in the policy 248.
Okay.
I think. Let me find it here though, because I want to make sure. Yes, it's the second paragraph with the hyperlink under guidelines. It says complaints of harassment against a student by a non-student are investigated in accordance with AR 348. That's the step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 process.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Liz, and thanks, Ed, for that. Jeff?
I think you're going to answer yes. You clarify because of the 400 to 500 series of policies being folded into 300, which means employees covering teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, the whole kitchen bucket.
Mm-hmm.
Just make
correct.
Yeah.
Harassment by could be students, parents, vendors, volunteers, agent, all that big list. Okay. Good. All right, that's it.
Okay, Susan?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, I have one question on policy 348 under delegation of responsibility. It says the superintendent or designee shall notify law enforcement.
Amy, which paragraph? I'm sorry.
The first paragraph under delegation of responsibility, it says the superintendent or designee shall notify law enforcement of shall, and I'm pointing out the word shall, notify law enforcement officials of reports and or incidents of harassment. My question is, it isn't a shall in policy 248. Is that by design because you don't necessarily take allegations or complaints to law enforcement when it comes to students? Because if you look at the second to last paragraph or third to last paragraph on 248, it says they may be referred to an appropriate law enforcement agency. So is that a very intentional distinction?
No, they really are intended to be the same. And I think technically they're both correct as written, because I think in 248, what's meant, it says they may be referred to the appropriate law enforcement agency, if required by law, is the caveat there.
Well, 348 says it shall be in accordance with applicable law.
Right. So if it's required to be reported.
Required.
Correct.
So in 348, it's required. In 248, it's not required. Or it's just written in such a way that it's potentially a little confusing.
We could, I think my recommendation is actually to leave 348 the way it is. If anything, I would recommend back on 248 saying that formal complaints or other reports of harassment shall be referred to the appropriate law enforcement agency for investigation, in accordance with applicable legal obligations.
So I would tell you, that's a substantial change for 248. Because I would be concerned that would oblige. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be contacting law enforcement in certain circumstances, but when you're talking about minors, as opposed to adults, is there a difference, Ed?
Well, no, because there's certain, the district has an MOU with local law enforcement. It's required by the Pennsylvania Safe Schools Act, and the Safe Schools Act requires that certain offenses that take place on school property get reported to law enforcement, and certain types of sexual harassment would definitely fall into that required notification. So you would only be required to report if you're required to report based on the law.
So your recommendation again would be to change that sentence in 248, Ed? Or
both sentences in both 248 and 348 are, as I read them, they're both legally correct. They're not framed the same way. One's kind of an affirmative statement, and one's kind of a statement by default. That's how I would characterize them. But the intention of both statements is to say that if the district is required to report, we will report.
Yeah, I'm going back and forth between the two statements and the two policies, and I agree with you, Ed. They both say the same thing in the sense that we will follow in accordance with applicable law, and and the only difference is in 248 it talks about there's going to be an AR that's going to also just be further develop the administrative regulation. So I just don't see someone flipping between 248 and 348 and being administratively
correct.
I don't see anyone administratively confused on what we need to do. Does that help clarify?
And my question really wasn't about that, Ken. It was just, is there a difference in what you're obligated to do when it occurs with a staff member versus a student? Because that's just how I read it, and I wasn't sure.
Now, Ed, what really governs for us is that MOU. We do an MOU every year with the law enforcement, and that's something that we are in constant contact, about when we have situations that based on an MOU or situations where we're even in question whether there's something that is, criminal activity or something that somebody is violating the law, we're reaching out to our local police.
Okay, well, then the consensus is it's fine to leave it the way it is. It's clear and it doesn't create any issue, then I'm fine with that. You clarified my confusion around that issue. So, all right, well then if nobody has any other questions about 348, we'll move it forward for a first reading for December. And then we have perhaps the opportunity for 448 and 548. Is there any way, given the time, that we could do sort of both in one fell swoop? Because
they should be taken together, actually. Yep.
Okay. So again, I don't know that we need to go through this, Ed. George and Ed have said it multiple times, but 448 and 548 are on the agenda to be repealed simply because we're evaluating these policies. They're just other classifications of staff, and we're trying to fold it into one section. So I'm gonna just, if anybody has any question, just for expediency's sake, or concern, you want to raise your hand and speak now? Okay, it looks like, unless I'm missing somebody, that everybody's okay with moving those two along for a first read for repeal. And maybe, should they be on the agenda for the business meeting as one agenda item or two separate ones?
Either way is completely fine. Different school districts do it differently, but there's no substantive difference.
Okay. All right, so with that, I think that concludes our policy work for today, and it brings us to new business. Does anybody have any new business? And seeing none, is there any public comment?
No public comment.
Okay, well then that concludes our policy work for today, and we have, by my watch, a few minutes to spare for anybody who needs it before the 6 o'clock meeting. So thank you all for your thoughtful questions and your patience as we went through this agenda. And we will see you all again in December. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Right.
Thank you.